Spyro is back and as adorable as ever. Spyro Reignited Trilogy is a remastered edition of the original trilogy from the PlayStation 1. The collection has been released for the Xbox One and PS4 this year. Spyro is a third-person platformer like Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, and others that are typically labeled as collectathons. Spyro the Adorable Dragon has a limited moveset that remains consistent throughout each game. He can jump, glide, and charge into enemies. Spyros 2 and 3 add on to this, but those are the basis of your movement. In this collection you get 3 entire games that all last around 6 or so hours, but this can be increased if you aim for 100% completion. A recommendation is subjected to the type of player you are. If you are a fan of the series like myself, then you should buy this game. If you enjoy 3D platformers, then you will likely enjoy this game as well, even though the movement is limited. If you are not a fan of these types of games, then this will likely not change your mind. But for $40, it's hard not to recommend. It's very easy to pick up and play, and the gameplay, while simple, is still enjoyable. Before continuing, I want to qualify a lot of what I will be discussing. For one, I played these games a lot growing up and I have experience with the series, but I will try my best to not allow any biases to come into play during this review. Another thing is, since Spyro is a classic franchise, it almost is impossible to not come into these games without some knowledge or opinion on them, especially if you follow gaming a lot. You may have never played them, but will likely know the series by reputation, and I can go into more detail about this, but it's likely not worth going into for this video. And since this is a new release, I will judge it as one, meaning I will judge this game as a game in 2018, not as a game from the late 90s. Visually, the game looks great. The world is vibrant and colorful, and the effects look and sound good as well. It's how you would expect it to look if you played the originals. It was shocking playing through some levels and thinking it looks exactly like how I remember it. Spyro looks as adorable as ever, and some of his animations, like during the loading screens, are just so hard not to smile at. His slide-in animation is just perfect. And all this will be easily seen by just watching a video of it. Spyro looks like a modern game, no doubt about that, favoring style over realism. The music sounds pretty good too, and they give the option of the original tracks or the remastered tracks, which I appreciate, but I personally stuck with the remastered tracks. The sound effects are great too, but I'm not qualified to speak in depth about the visuals or music, but I enjoyed them both. The game has some visual consistency which makes playing them intuitive. Example, things in silver will have Spyro charge into them like chests and vases. Large enemies cannot be killed by charging into them and only fire damages them. I have not noticed many visual oddities or anything that looked noticeably off, but there was a couple of times that the game bugged out. Performance wise, I never noticed many frame rate drops or anything of the like, but I had one crash during playing which I unfortunately didn't record. There is a plot. You play as Spyro and you're the only one who can save the world. Spyro 2 adds on more characters to the story, such as Allura, the furry bait, Hunter, the pussy, Professor, the dipshit, and Moneybags, the most hated character of my childhood. Spyro 3 adds on more to this with several playable characters and a new furry bait, a female rabbit. Probably because of Space Jam. There is technically a plot, just know that. Before continuing, I highly recommend switching the camera to active instead of passive. The camera kinda sucks for all games, but this makes it more bearable. Spyro is a third-person platformer, and your primary goal in every game and every level will be collect all the gems along with the game's primary collectible. In Spyro 1 it's dragons, in Spyro 2 it's orbs, and Spyro 3 it's dragon eggs. Each game features 4 to 6 worlds, and inside each world are portals to smaller contained areas that have a theme or a special mechanic tied to it. And no matter what game you're playing, your primary goal will be to collect everything and then move on. And once you reach 100% completion, there is no reason to stick around. You're assisted by a dragonfly named Sparks. He is your health bar and collects nearby gems. He has 3 hits before vanishing, and to replenish them you'll have to hit a small animal, either through charging into it or by setting them on fire, to produce a butterfly for him to eat. I don't know how this makes any amount of sense, just roll with it. Sparks can guide you to nearby gems, which is handy for a completionist. Since it's an old game, they have a life system, and I absolutely hate life systems in games and even think for remastered they should be taken out. I won't go into extensive detail about why I hate them, just know that I hate them. Badly. There are separated flying sections that have Spyro needing to fly through or flame 8 different targets. I personally don't enjoy these that much because the skills you gain by playing every other level don't correspond to these sections, but they are added for variety's sake so you aren't just doing platforming levels. Spyro has very few moves, like I mentioned earlier. The sequels do expand on them, but I will save all the changes and additions for later. You can jump, and while in the air you can glide. But this is where the limited moveset becomes an issue, because once you figure out the best time to jump and launch into a glide, there is nothing else you will really have to learn. The gliding distance isn't intuitive, but it's something you can get used to. Even saying that, the game is very easy to pick up and play. The games are all fun and enjoyable, and I found myself going through levels quickly and having hours go by without noticing. The charge and flame attacks are used for combat purposes. Regular enemies and chests are destroyed by either charging into them or hitting them with fire. Charging into anything nearby is made difficult because the camera never really follows you, which makes short range charges difficult. Enemies or chests covered in armor must be charged into. Large enemies are only damaged by fire, and it's worth praising that these rules are consistent throughout the 3 games. There are special chests that can only be opened by explosives, and some that can only be opened by keys, but these look too close to the ones that need to be rammed into. The sequels do help distinguish them more. You can roll to either side, but I never use this in any of the games. The levels typically all have a forward path of progression with some side areas for additional collectibles. Every stage has a limited amount of gems to collect, and the game does something creative with its collectibles. It will tease you with something out of reach in order to nudge you into finding a way to reach them. Like, they will have gems in hard to reach locations, and this should trigger you to think about how you can get up there because you know it's possible. Every stage has wide open areas separated by wide gaps, and here's where Spyro differs from other games because he is a dragon, obviously, and can fly, so the challenge becomes finding the right moment to jump off of and glide. The game is at its best when you're flying through stages and entering this flow of jumping around, charging forward, and collecting everything in sight. The 3 games do all have similar setups, but the sequels do add on to the base gameplay and switch it up. I think the games get better as they go on, and these new additions fit in well with the core mechanics. Spyro 2 feels like it builds onto the first game, and 3 feels like a refinement of the series that adds more variety. 2 adds on to Spyro's moves. He gets a hover, which is useful for getting more distance and account for slightly mistiming jumps. He can also climb, swim, and head bash. Swimming means that water is no longer a danger, as it was in the first game. It means that levels can feature underwater sections and it doesn't have Spyro need to constantly get air as he can swim indefinitely. 2 and 3 adds boss fights, but these have the player needing to wait around for an opportunity to attack instead of an actual battle. The camera during these boss fights is locked, and I don't think this is a good idea because it doesn't allow the player to have control, and this adds some frustration as the movement becomes locked into the boss's direction instead of Spyro's, which makes these sections feel off. I will say the second game has the best final boss in my opinion because it tests you on all the mechanics and abilities learned in the game. There remains this forward progression through the levels but gives additional missions and challenges for Spyro to complete, which allow the levels to feel more unique. Some may have you play hockey, others will ask you to pilot the ship. There are little changes to the life systems that each game makes. In all of them there are hidden lives to collect, but in the first game, enemies drop gems the first time that you kill them and then spirit orbs after that. And once you collect enough spirit orbs you gain an extra life. 2 doesn't have the enemies drop gems, but after killing enough of them in the stage, a bonus power up gets unlocked. 3 just has the enemies drop gems again, but without the spirit orb dropping upon repeated deaths. I personally say that the first game had the best system in this regard. 3 adds more variety by having additional characters to control. There are 4 in total and all of them have unique moves and missions that take advantage of their different abilities. The only one I dislike is the penguin. The camera just can't fucking cooperate. It just feels like the game is actively fighting you and not allowing you to be in control. The other 3 are fine but still awkward and not as fun to be as Spyro. There's also a skateboard minigame that can go suck a dick. I hate it so much. Everything about it just feels off and doing these sections are so insanely annoying. There is more variety, but this adds the issue that not every player will like all the mission types, and these minigames are non-optional as they reward Dragon Age, which are needed for progression. The games all have the flying sections mentioned earlier, but in the third game they changed them up by having a fixed time limit and informing the player on the intended path forward, which made these sections a lot more enjoyable. In the first 2 you get additional time for every item collected, and the intended way forward is more obscure. The third game has flying races to go along with them. 2 and 3 add a new issue, backtracking, because you will need to return to previous areas after unlocking a new ability or character. In the first game there are no new moves added, so the only thing stopping you from progressing is your own skill with these mechanics. Moneybags appears in several areas and demands that you give him money in order to progress. This means that you are incentivized to collect as many gems as possible. But this also just makes you hate the guy, as every time you see him you know that he's going to demand money. In the third game, it does have him getting beat up more, which is always good. You even get your own revenge at the end. There are some issues that I couldn't fit in naturally in the video. The tutorial system in the games are all bad and feature a lot of repetition and reminds you how to do basic things that the player has likely figured out by now. Also, these tutorials are not available at any time to easily access. 2 is that the cutscenes don't have subtitles. This is outright unacceptable 2018. Some of the vehicles are fucking terrible to control. I hated those sections. The game breaks consistency in Spyro 3 with this pool of water that for some reason instantly kills you. It makes no sense for 1,000 reasons, and this area needs to be patched ASAP. The areas in each world are all around the same in terms of difficulty, probably because there's no restriction on what you have to do first. The games are all consistent visually, which means that no game stands out as they all look identical. But for $40, this collection is a great return for Spyro fans, and anyone interested in the series have the best opportunity to play them now. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe. That's all for me, goodbye.